In the last year, I've done a couple of these second chance game reviews for a couple of different games. The first one was Mafia 3, the second one was Ghost Recon Wildlands. Both of those games I found a lot of enjoyment in, despite their flaws. Today, I'm going to be talking about Dishonored 2, as you can tell from the title. However, this time around it's a bit different. This game has very few flaws. Almost none, actually. All it was really marred by was a slightly rocky launch. That was all it took, though, for me to put it on the back burner for well over a year. Over Christmas break, however, I played all 33 hours of Dishonored 2 almost in a row in just a couple of weeks, which is unheard of for me. And what I found was an absolutely incredible game that, as a fan of the first Dishonored, improved on essentially every element of the original while expanding the universe and all of your options as a player. So maybe you're in the same boat that I was in. You heard about the rocky launch of Dishonored 2 and you kinda just forgot about it. Let's see if we can look at what makes Dishonored 2 well worth taking a second look at.
Displays of someone who loses the machine. Playback for unambiguous enemy. Unauthorized presence. This person in field of view.
So, knowing that poor frame rates and overall performance issues and glitches were one of the main launch issues, let me address that first as we head into why I think Dishonored 2 is not only worth a second chance, but is an incredible game. For me, playing on a GTX 1080 for my graphics card with a 1440p G-Sync screen running at 144 Hz with a Intel i7 3930K CPU, I got incredible frame rates for almost the entire game. I spent most of the game hovering in the 90 FPS range at 1440p. In some areas, including a level that requires the game to render essentially two levels at the same time, is all I can say, I did have frame rates drop into the 40s. That was for brief segments of one particular level. That's really the only time that I noticed a significant frame rate drop. Again, for the most part, my FPS was 90 plus, even at 1440p, and at times I would even hit 120 FPS plus. The performance issues that plagued the game at launch are long gone, and it seems to be in the perfect condition for a playthrough for anyone who hasn't tried it just yet. Okay, enough of the past, let's look at what makes this game amazing. The first thing I want to talk about is the world. Dishonored 1 was an incredible look at a new IP, which these days is more and more rare. The final game had come a long way from our first previews, which felt like it borrowed a whole lot from the Half-Life universe. I remember reading those first PC Gamer previews and going, well, no wonder they got some of the Half-Life concept artists for this game. It's just their own standalone expansion. If Dishonored 1 was out to prove that it was its own original world and experience for players, Dishonored 2 is that world and experience really maturing, and the designers and writers being really comfortable with this universe that they've created. I've always been a fan of a good narrative-driven single-player classic-style game like the Half-Life or BioShock series. And the world they've created here in Dishonored, and Dishonored 2 specifically, really piques your interest early on. It is both familiar and unfamiliar, this really fascinating mix of Victorian stylings with a little bit of steampunk, and this feeling of this grim industrial revolution, but there's still monarchies, there's all kinds of strange technology, and here in Dishonored 2, we even see the reveal of robotic clockwork soldiers. Every character you meet in Dishonored 2, and every environment you visit, begs to be explored. I wanted to read every single note or scrap of a book that I could get my hands on. I wanted to look at every single painting and read the plaques that are actually readable on those paintings along the way, because the world is just so fascinating. Perhaps just because it was new, but In Dishonored 1, a lot of the world still felt very vague. Even having completed the game, I felt like I didn't quite understand how some things in this universe worked. But here in Dishonored 2, it feels like the designers are really confident in the universe that they've created, and everything seems to fit together just a little bit better. If you enjoyed the world of Dishonored 1, Dishonored 2 is the deeper look at the universe that you were hoping for. On a related note, the individual levels themselves are an absolute joy to play. One of the only weak areas for me in Dishonored 1 was that you spent your entire time in the game in Dunwall, the capital city of the Empire. After a while, the dreary, London-like atmosphere grew a little bit old. It was always basically the same kind of thing. In Dishonored 2, not only does most of the game take place in Karnaca, a southern island in this universe, every single level is its own unique set piece, and I really can't say much more than that because if you haven't played the game, I don't want to spoil how different and unique some of these levels are. But to give just a vague overview, some levels take place on a former mental institution on an island. There is a eccentric rich person inventor who has a mansion that transforms before your eyes. Don't want to say more than that, but talk about some beautiful animations. I was stunned when I got to this level. You have both the seedy underbelly of the city, as well as some very posh and rich sections of the city as well. There are also some levels that you get to see kind of in a before and after state, where you go through them in a time of relative peace, only to come back at a later point and see the after effects of the conflict that is the main part of the main story in Dishonored 2. Because of how unique these levels are, I never got tired of exploring a new area. Again, trying to keep this as vague as possible, there's even a level where you can hold a device in your hand, and through a shard of broken crystal or glass, not really sure which, you can see through time to a couple of years before the events of Dishonored 2, and you actually go back and forth between the two different time periods in this same location. It was wild to be in this abandoned part of the city, and to hold up a device in front of you in a room full of dusty, destroyed furniture, and to see people walking around this furnished, vibrant, happy place just a couple of years earlier, and to then actually watch through this device at the guards moving around and figure out, okay, if I hide in this corner and then travel back in time to when the guards are still there and people are still walking around, I'm still going to be hidden. It's an amazing concept, and again, it was just another level where I was blown away by how unique it was. I played a very violent playthrough of Dishonored 1, so this time around, when it came time at the beginning of Dishonored 2 to pick playing as either Emily or Corvo, your protector and hero from the first game, I chose Emily as her abilities are a bit more suited for a stealth or non-lethal playthrough. Especially playing as a stealth character, the world of Dishonored 2 truly is a sandbox for you to figure out how things work together and how you can manipulate things to your advantage. If you accept the option to receive powers from the Outsider and power from the Void, which why wouldn't you, they're amazing, you have a ton of fantastic options that you unlock as you progress through the game for taking out your enemies. And again, I was going for a non-lethal when possible, mostly stealth approach. One of my favorite abilities allows you to enter this shadow walk form, where tendrils of smoke kind of go out from your twisted, crawling form as you sneak up on unsuspecting enemies, grab them from behind, and hold your shadow hand over their face and literally pull the consciousness out of them, knocking them out non-lethally, at least technically. It looks absolutely horrifying. But even if you have the ability to do this a few times in a row, you gotta be very careful that no one sees this horrific shadow shape sneaking up on them, because, as you might imagine, that will lead to some very loud panic. Every ability and gadget that you get along your journey in Dishonored 2 just adds more tools to your toolbox for toying with your enemies. By the end of the game, while I wouldn't say I'm anything close to an expert player, I was using just about all of the things I had unlocked because every scenario was like a buffet of options for me. I couldn't wait to try a shadow walk over here and then a stun mine over here, and perhaps link these two people together. And whereas a lot of games like this, I tend to load a save if things go wrong. I didn't load saves very often in Dishonored 2 because when things go wrong, it was actually a ton of fun, even immersively, to just roll with it a lot of the time. One of my favorite moments from my playthrough where things went wrong, I just rolled with it, was when I tried to link two guards together with the linkage power who were guarding a dock, and then my plan was to pull one of them towards me, catch him in midair, and knock him out, hopefully being able to then knock out the second guard who would be flung along with his buddy, and then sneak across this little bit of water. What actually happened was I used my ability to pull the first guard through the air, successfully caught him, knocked him out. However, his buddy, who because of the linkage also was flung through the air, smashed into the rocks next to me, broke his neck, and died on landing. The guy I was choking out then slid into the water, where he was devoured before my eyes by a piranha fish. 2 deaths, not intended, but I stood there just laughing, going, I love this game's combat mechanics, because even when things go wrong, it can just be a ton of fun. Hey, I tried, right? There's even more options for the swordplay, which is a bit more in-depth and a ton of fun. When parrying, you can actually stun your enemy, and if they're by themselves, perhaps whip around and choke them out and you won't have to kill them. If you do have to fight for your life though, sword fights are dynamic, violent, and intense, with a ton of new animations and again, a lot more depth. The few sword fights that I got into were so much fun that I almost regretted my decision to go for a non-lethal playthrough. Just like the original game, you also have a ton of gadgets and bone charm upgrades to give you slight perks, some with disadvantages, to continue to tweak and adjust your playstyle, and again, just give you more tools in the toolbox for toying with enemies in these levels. There's quite a few hidden secrets in the game as well, and sometimes an ability or a bone charm might help you reach a hidden area, or figure out an alternate method for taking an enemy out. And that is something else that is just really cool, and this kind of bleeds over into the writing and story of the game too. Playing non-lethally, frequently I would look for a third option, and a lot of times there was a little bit of extra research or exploring you could do in a level to figure out that third way of completing a task. Combined with the fact that you can play as both Emily and Corvo for the entire main quest, I can't imagine all of the branching decisions that you make over the course of this game and how much replayability it has if you decide to try and see everything. Next up, let's talk about graphics for just a minute, because I think this definitely bears mentioning. Dishonored 1 always had a fantastic and unique visual style to it. It really made the world feel unique. The problem was, even when it launched, it really felt dated. Dishonored 2 takes that same visual style and brings it into the modern generation. The texture work and lighting in the game is absolutely beautiful. It's cheesy to say, but this is essentially the world of Dishonored finally in HD. Everything just looks great. And as you're exploring around, you're going to want to look at all of the paintings and all of the wear and tear around the city. Look at people's faces and their expressions. This game really is a work of art. And if you have access to the art book, it's also worth digging into. Every area just isn't a unique and exciting place to explore thematically, but visually, they all look incredible. If gameplay is the meat of the game, it's time to talk about the potatoes. That would be the story. Dishonored 2's writing felt a little bit more coherent to me, but this might just be because we're now in a established world, and things make a bit more sense. That being said, in my opinion, the most interesting characters and stories are actually in the sidelines as you progress through the main quest. There's a lot of unique areas that you'll find, and people you'll meet who you can then do jobs for, or help in certain ways, and a lot of that is, again, up to you to explore and find those things. On the other hand, the story, while interesting, especially learning the backstory of how this rebellion grew and took hold in your empire, is interesting. The ending and the climax of the game is basically very, very predictable. There were no real surprises after the first third of the game, as far as story goes. As the story begins to pick up pace near the end, it really just kind of gets on the rails and you go right into the ending, which hits you kind of suddenly, and then the game is just kind of over. Again, no real surprises and not a bad story, but nothing mind-blowing. I think the real joy in the story of Dishonored 2 is how well the world supports it, as you travel to different parts of your empire and see how the events of the main story are affecting the common people. Emily even comments on this in a couple of the cutscenes, saying that how she's never going to forget what she's seen here, and how it's going to definitely change her into the future.
He gave the woman a black eye. Poor waste of a thing. Only asking directions.
And there we have it. Those are all of the points that I wanted to cover on my second chance review for Dishonored 2. I hope you guys are also giving the game a second chance if you perhaps put it on the back burner. Perhaps this video has convinced you. To be honest guys, I loved this game. It was probably my favorite single player game from the last couple years. I hope that comes through in the review. As always, a like on the video is appreciated if you found it informative and you enjoyed it, and subscribe to stick around for more content like this. I do want to do a couple more of these second chance reviews, as I'm generally behind a bit on playing games that I've been wanting to play, and occasionally they'll catch me by surprise, much like this one did. For now, I'm already diving into the Death of the Outsider, which is kind of a standalone expansion pack for Dishonored 2. So for now, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all next time.